Just think of the magnitude of pushing yourself around the world in a wheelchair. At the time, people thought he had lost his mind. What we came to learn was Rick Hansen was reshaping all of our minds about people with mobility challenges. Not only has he raised millions of dollars for research, he has opened our thinking to include everyone. Thank you, Rick, for joining us for this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Carol. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate it.
When you think back to your childhood, you're such an athlete. Were you always athletic?
Yeah, my earliest memories, I was always on the move. A little kid, going down through the fields and out onto the streams and fishing and hiking with my father and grandfather and cousins. And it was just like an ideal adventure playground and paradise.
And so unfortunately, at the age of 15, you had a car accident. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what happened in the accident?
Yeah, I just graduated from grade 10 and I was on this idyllic adventure. I was always on an adventure and I was planning it for months, and me and my buddies, we went off to the Bella Coola Valley, fished salmon and trout, and then two of us were hitchhiking back. It was a long ride back, but we ended up getting a ride in the back of a pickup truck with a guy who we had helped change his flat tire, he and his girlfriend, in the middle of nowhere just a few days earlier. And he was going to drive right by us, but he stopped because he recognized us and said, "Get in." We were in this 56 Chev pickup truck on the back, fully loaded with a bunch of equipment, and we ran around a corner a few hours later and he lost control and it rolled and threw me back first against a big steel toolbox and broke my back and, of course, damaged my spinal cord, and that was the end of the beginning.
The ironies in life, right? That he happened to stop and pick you up.
Yeah, it was so ironic. Not only that he had stopped, but that one good turn and favor does another, and it sealed my fate. But then again, my friend had wanted to change sides of the pickup truck because he wasn't happy about the side that he was on. So I thought, what the heck, and do a favor for a buddy. And so that double karma came back and sealed my fate again, because now I was on the inside of the roll and there was no escape. It was a reality. So
describe for me, if you can, what those first days, months were like.
You can imagine. Here's a kid whose whole life revolved around physical activity and the use of his legs. And as an athlete, I was pretty good, and I had crazy dreams about maybe representing my country at the Olympic Games one day. And the next thing, this doctor's telling me that I'll never walk again. And it was really lonely and challenging. And there were many moments where I just was in the pit of despair, for sure.
How did you turn that around?
I sometimes wonder. I think sometimes maybe it was just one day at a time. Sometimes, you get to the worst moment, like when you're face down and, you've just thrown up and 2 o'clock in the morning and you've called the nurse and they don't show up for hours, and you sit there contemplating your reality. And I think at that moment when they cleaned me up and got me settled again and I was face back up, I started to wonder, well, where's the hope? And then I realized, hey, I went to grab a glass of water and I literally could barely pick it up, and my arms were getting weak, and I hadn't been using them really. And it dawned on me, hey, I can actually do something. And I asked them to bring a set of rubber bands to put on the side of my bed. And I started exercising my arms. And I think those little baby goals, that sense that it maybe will get better. And then the next was to get out of the striker bed and get into a normal bed for my 16th birthday and sit up, and then get into the wheelchair and learn how to use the wheelchair. And those little baby goals were huge for me.
I know that you have done so much to help people who have been in similar situations that you found yourself. What advice do you give them?
Hang on to hope, because it's everything. It will get better. And there's times we don't see it. We feel nothing but despair, but then be vigilant for finding it and looking for inspiration. And for me, probably some of the biggest parts of inspiration were to try to paint this dark canvas of despair, and put some borders and texture of color and light and form and shape. And I needed to be exposed to that world that I had no idea existed. I needed role models. Like a guy like Stan Strong wheeled into my life as a peer counselor, and he just, all he did was smile. Like he just beamed joy and peace. And I'm like, don't you know you have a disability? And yet he was there putting it in perspective for me. I was in the hospital 4 months. He was there for 4 years. He didn't have a rehab center to go to because they didn't exist then. People with spinal cord injury weren't supposed to survive. And yet how could he feel so comfortable with his life? And it was because he had this sense of mindfulness, I think, that he focused on what he could do, not what he couldn't do. And he refused to yield that search for love and purpose and finding how to release his ability in spite of all these other things of pain, suffering, and limitation. And that was on him. And I thought, oh my God, if he can do it, so can I. Yeah, he was a huge inspiration to me. Yeah.
You have spent your entire life as an amazing athlete. You have won 19 international marathons, 15 medals from Paralympics and Pan Am Games. And so is that, in a sense, what has saved you and turned you around, your athletic ability, sports, competition?
I think the biggest challenge was not really the loss of the use of my legs. It was the maxims and the stereotypes and the barriers that were inside my mind as a young 15-year-old kid, which is very much like Canadians at the time, that if you had a disability, you were really in trouble. Someone to be pitied, not much opportunity. And what I had to recognize is challenge those maxims, and I was still whole as a human being, and I still loved adventures, I still love athletics, and I needed to get back doing the things I used to do, but do them differently. And nowhere in the definition of an athlete does it say you have to use your legs in order to be one. Instead of using my legs, I use my arms, be driven by your heart, and be propelled by the chair. And I got rid of that stereotype and that baggage, and I was liberated. It was incredible. But it didn't happen overnight. It was a hard grind, a lot of pain, a lot of tears, a lot of dark moments, but somehow, thanks to others and being able to figure that out and translate it, somehow I managed to get there. It was wonderful.
And so the man in motion certainly got in motion,
Yeah.
went around the world.
Yeah.
How did you decide, this is what I'm going to do?
I think it's a combination of experiences, like when you've received so much goodwill from family, from the medical profession, from role models like Stan Strong, being able to recruit Terry Fox after he had lost his leg to his cancer, and to get him out and play with our team, and to see his journey of going across the country for cancer research, but looking at the way people looked at him and others with disabilities differently. They saw ability. And I'd been dreaming of wheeling around the world as an adventure since I was strapped up into that bed and into the rehab center. And I just eventually realized that it was possible because I was a wheelchair marathoner, traveled the world seeing these barriers inside minds of individuals with disabilities, inside society, and their expectations, or inside the physical environment, and also the barriers of people believing that a cure for paralysis wasn't possible. And I wanted to do something about that, and I finally was able to put it all together and say, yeah, I have talent, I have experiences, and I can make a difference. And so I decided to wheel around the world and show what was possible for people with disabilities if barriers were removed, and hopefully raise some money. And it was the beginning. And my time to pay it forward.
I cannot imagine the logistics and the planning that went into it.
It was crazy. Here it is pre-information age where, there was no internet, no GPS, and, wheeling across the street seemed like a challenge if you were in a chair, and wheeling 40,000 kilometers through 34 countries and 4 continents, bringing a message with it, and then trying to generate a financial legacy. Most people thought I was a bit crazy, and sometimes so did I. But you start with baby steps, and we were totally under-prepared, underfunded, but the window of opportunity was closing, and there was a really fine line between it being just a dream that I would be looking back on, in my 40s or 50s, wondering, oh, I should have, and the opportunity to start. And that first day was our start, at Oak Ridge Mall.
So take me with you. You're there at Oak Ridge Mall.
Here we are.
You're thinking, uh-oh, this is really going to happen?
We had been planning for months, and finally we were there. We had 200 well-wishers, and the Premier Bennett was there. Betty and Rolly Fox had came up, to support me and gave me a little miniature maquette of the statue of Terry at Thunder Bay, and I think most people didn't think I'd make it. And, to be honest, when I was there doing the speech, my shoulder was aching because it had been injured, and we were up all night, and I was exhausted, putting stuff in the motorhome, and I'm thinking, oh God, what have you got yourself into here? And then I leave the parking lot, go under a tunnel, and the team tries to catch up to me, and they crash this box on the top of the motorhome, right into the tunnel, and people are thinking, he's going to go around the world in a wheelchair? Good luck. He's going to be back very soon.
There, of course, were highlights and lowlights, I'm sure, during that tour. What was the really special, best moment you can remember?
I think aside from coming home, where the dream and reality were just unbelievably linked. I mean, it was everything that I could have possibly imagined and more. It was wheeling through China. I was actually blown away that we even got accepted into China, because, the Soviet Union didn't let us wheel. We ended up being shut out from and denied from East Germany and from Egypt. And, so it was not expected that we'd get into China, but we did. And millions of people from Beijing to Shanghai coming out to see if it was possible. A person with a disability not being a shut-in, a ward of state, a burden, actually being out, engaged, and leading. It was a revolutionary idea, and it was the beginning of seeds to make change, and I was honored to be able to be that lightning rod. And I guess the greatest moment, culminating moment there, from a symbolic point of view, was to be able to wheel up the Great Wall of China to get to the highest point, to demonstrate there are no barriers on this earth that can't be climbed or crossed.
That's pretty steep.
That was like a massive mountain. I had to have my team behind me, because every time I would take a stroke of the wheel and then go to reset, the chair would start careening backwards, and it was a struggle. I didn't even know that there were stairs, because we had these National Geographic photos, and so we got to the wall, and there were people waiting, young kids, in chairs, wondering, is it possible? Because it was a real symbolic thing, for the Chinese culture, that a rite of passage to summit the wall, and so I got there and saw these stairs, and I went, I can't go. And Amanda said, well, you have to, they're waiting. And I said, well, this is the only place on the tour that I can't wheel by myself. And she said, well, we've carried you as team members for the whole journey, and the wall is a symbol, and let it be a symbol of your ability to get up the wall, but let us help you get onto the wall, and then just get going. And so it was a huge moment for me, and being able to get past your ego and put it in perspective. And
the other side of the coin, what was the worst part of the tour?
Wheeling through most of Europe was incredibly tough. We were going through 17 countries in like 6 months, and we just seemed to get traction, and then we were into another country, new language. We were lost half the time. We were just about out of money. We lost one of our team members from exhaustion. We almost lost the rest, and we were so far from finishing, so far from home. I was ill and injured often, and it was just a grind. And we just kept saying, you know, like, just get past Europe and then one step closer. I thought about quitting when I came back from a great response in Asia and got back to the United States, and it was not happening in the States. We didn't get the word out. And I really did think about, I was going to quit. And Amanda really encouraged me to have faith that just around the corner, Providence would set in, and the Canadians would be ready for us, because I'd have to now go across the country in the middle of winter. And she was right. You know, Canadians were ready. And I look back on that moment, you know, in Florida, you know, and I go, oh my God, like, I was that close to blowing it all up. And look what was just waiting for me. Huh.
Back to your idea of you take each day.
One day at a time, one stroke at a time. And look for me, it was looking for, in spite of everything that was like, every day was like a struggle to survive. There were so many challenges, 113 kilometers of wheeling a day for the first half, and then 80 the second half. You had to look for the little moments that were there, even if it wasn't meeting your expectations. Probably the biggest story for me was when I was struggling in Europe. We were going through Poland, and there was a small little community. They'd come out to support me, and there was a guy who had a disability, and he didn't have a wheelchair. He had a piece of plywood on 4 skateboard wheels with a pillow on the plywood, and he was pushing himself with his hands. And he came up to me, and he was streaming tears of joy, and he said, "Rick, what you're doing is so important to me because you're making a difference. My family and my community for the first time are looking at me with pride and ability." And that's what kept me going, really. One moment like that.
So many people would have been content, having done such a magnificent example of what was possible, would have left it at that. But in fact, it's almost where you started, because then you set up the Rick Hansen Foundation. What was your initial vision for it? What were you thinking?
I realized that the end of the tour was just the beginning, and I'd been impacted by the magnitude of the challenge. My eyes were open, but I also realized fundamentally that what I needed to do is I needed to keep moving forward and not be the man in motion, but have it be many in motion. And we pushing forward on those 2 big dreams, you know, a world without barriers for people with disabilities, and also a cure for paralysis. And, you know, it's been a lifelong mission, no longer just a project to finish wheeling around the world. It's changing the world. And ultimately, it's been the greatest experience and growth of my entire life. Disability is a big deal. It affects all of us. And if we can remind people of that, they often see a symbol of disability being a stick man in a wheelchair, but it isn't. So people have a sense of how big this issue is, and if we can work towards building that awareness, that's the first step. Change attitudes from negative to positive, second step. And then look for fundamental barriers. And to me, the big fundamental barrier is the places and spaces that we live, work, learn, and play. And if they're not accessible and inclusive to match up with those attitudes and that acceptance, then we'll never get there.
So how are we doing? How far along this path are we, would you say?
I would say we're really just at the halfway point on the big push for accessibility and inclusivity.
I expect that you have to deal with politicians and governments a lot.
There's no question, yeah. I mean, decision makers.
So how does that work for you?
I don't think really most politicians and key leaders understand how big the opportunity is. And so they're often seduced by perhaps accountants who look at the reactive bottom line and say, well, you can't afford, to do this. And in reality, we can't afford not to do this. And that's my biggest challenge as a thought leader, to really help wake up political and economic leaders to really shift their view, because they were on that same journey as I was as a 15-year-old, and they had the same stereotypes and limitations in their thinking, and they're just waking up now. And I'm determined, and I'm not going to give up, and I'm seeing more and more leaders join me, and that's what gives me inspiration.
The second part of your vision for the foundation, you mentioned medical research.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about what you've been doing in that side of the issue?
I mean, they've proven that the spinal cord actually can regrow, that the central nerves can regrow. They're challenged, and there's ways to stimulate them. There's ways to think about crossing the chasm of lost cell tissue. There's ways to think about reconnecting, and there's also biotech solutions that are creating interim solutions and also workarounds. Really amazing. I mean, there are people who have been able to have full recovery because of the treatment that they get today, or partial recovery. There's more and more people with incomplete paralysis, and yet there's still a long way to go. And my dream was to help Vancouver and British Columbia be a hub of a global network of collaborators.
So Rick, how do you hope people think of you? What will your legacy be?
Oh gosh, I mean, I hope first of all, if they know that I'm like just the guy from Williams Lake, who's been incredibly proud to live in this great province of British Columbia, in this amazing country of Canada, but not satisfied, that its journey isn't done. We're still trying to be the Canada that we want, and I'm trying to do my best to try to help play my role to get there, and to help it be part of the world in which we live in. So we're not just thinking of our borders. We're a global society. Canadians impact the world and should. And yet, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and I'm someone who's on journeys and loves adventure and wants to grow and learn. I hope mostly they just know that I tried to live a good life, tried to grow along the way, and tried to give more than I took. And that's probably it.
Thank you for all you've done.
Thanks.
Rick Hansen, a BC legend who is always in motion.